I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics. Messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider. This is your theology and news roundup for May the 7th, 2025. Today, probably the impending world attention is on the conclave which has assembled at the Vatican in the Sistine Chapel to elect the next pope. And just to make it clear, as of going live this afternoon, we haven't seen any white smoke. But we know that this is something which is soon to change. And of course, there are also a lot of things taking place in the Middle East. Rumblings between India and Pakistan, ongoing questions, Russia and Ukraine, and indeed, there is a strong need for each and every one of us to be praying for a quick resolution to these matters. And above all, what about the Israel-Hamas conflict? Okay, so let's get started on our theology roundup for today. Have you ever heard the theological proposition that within Paul's letter of 1 Corinthians, so the epistle of 1 Corinthians, not that it doesn't appear elsewhere, but especially in 1 Corinthians, that there are various statements which are made, statements which appear, which were not actually statements or theological conclusions of the Apostle Paul, but instead, and it's pretty obvious when you read 1 Corinthians, that there is a two-way discussion taking place between the Corinthians and between Paul. Have you ever heard it proposed that in specific places in 1 Corinthians, although it's not the only place in Paul's letters, but it's affluent in 1 Corinthians, that Paul was responding to various Corinthian slogans? In particular, we know that it's very easily deduced that the Corinthians had a problem with factionalism. And you see it from the verse, I am of Paul, I am of Apollos, I am of Cephas, I am of Messiah. It's not difficult to deduce in this two-way exchange between Paul and the Corinthians that Paul would be quoting from written correspondence, a written letter to him, or oral correspondence carried by people coming back to Paul, what they witnessed in Corinth. Some group, some faction in Corinth was saying this. Paul had to respond to it. This is something which is definitely adhered to, that Paul was responding to factional slogans in Corinth. This is something you will definitely see adhered to by many contemporary Christian commentators on 1 Corinthians. If you have a good study Bible, worth the paper it's printed on, it's going to be noted. If you're using one of the more modern English Bible translations, you're going to see different possible slogans separated out in quotation marks. And if you do not already, this is a topic which is reviewed in our ministry commentary, 1 Corinthians 4, the practical messianic. And in fact, you can see that we address Corinthian slogans Paul is having to respond to or refute. You can get this at outreachisraelbookstore.com. Now, one of the things I do have to note for you, I have known about the presence of Corinthian slogans, and we're going to get into a big one in just a moment. I have known about the presence of Corinthian slogans formally going back to 2007 when I took Introduction to the New Testament at Asbury Theological Seminary, spring of 2007, with Woody Anderson. And he said, have you ever read parts of 1 Corinthians? And it's like, there seems to be this separation between, or this schism between what Paul was saying, and did Paul actually agree with that? And he informed us all that there are many, many scholars who recognize that within 1 Corinthians, there were different slogans of a Corinthian faction being quoted, and that's why in different modern versions, they're in quotation marks. Paul was responding to them. Now, in today's Messianic community, and I mean this with all the love and respect in the world, to this date, almost 30 years, I have never really seen it emphasized by a Messianic rabbi, a Messianic teacher, a Messianic leader that, there's some difficult statements in 1 Corinthians, and it's possible that Paul was quoting from the Corinthians, and he was responding to things he did not necessarily agree with. And this is something which I know can come as a shock to many Messianic people, because there's just not a lot of people out there in the Messianic community who have been informed about this, much less are teaching about it during their Shabbat service or other studies. Many simply want to take the easy way, or I would even say the chicken way out. Well, 2 Peter says that our brother Paul has difficult things to say, and the unstable twist them to their destruction. So I don't know what is meant here. I don't know what is intended here. Well, hopefully today we're going to give you some clues as to how to better deal with this, because there's a lot of information out there in 1 Corinthians commentaries, very helpful, which can guide you into how to sort through this. Okay, on the Messianic Apologetics website, so messianicapologetics.net, and go to the top first. Click on the FAQ tab here, and then go down to the letter C with 1 Corinthians 6:12. Okay, and click on that, and then a PDF file will open up for this FAQ entry, 1 Corinthians 6:12. How can you say that the law of Moses is still to be followed by Christians today when it is quite clear that all things are now lawful? Have you ever encountered this before? You probably have. I remember when I was in college, and my roommate, my junior year, was a pastor's son, and he had this very question, and he directed me to 1 Corinthians 6:12, which in the New American Standard, that's the 1995 update, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are profitable. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be mastered by anything. Now, just looking at a surface level of the English text here, taking all things are lawful in an inappropriate way could mean, among other things, that thievery and burglary are neither crimes nor sin, lying in a court of justice is neither a crime nor a sin, premarital sex, extramarital affairs, and homosexuality are not sin, murder is neither a crime nor a sin, idolatry is not sin, even when practiced alongside the worship of the God of Israel, right? So what do you do with this passage? Well, actually, there are two significant issues to be probed from 1 Corinthians 6:12. And now there's a lot of information here in the FAQ entry, which you can read later. But the first one is recognizing the clause panta moi exestin. One of the things which is immediately absent from panta moi exestin is any term which uses the root nomos, which of course means law. In 1 Timothy 1:8, the term nomimos appears, You're familiar with this statement. We know that the law is good if one uses it lawfully. Nomimos, or some other derivation from the root nomos is not what appears in the source text of 1 Corinthians 6:12. In fact, it is the term ex esti, which more correctly means it is allowed, it is in one's power, is possible, the Liddell Scott lexicon, or perhaps also it is proper, permitted, concise Greek-English dictionary of the New Testament. And there are commentators who recognize, like J. Paul Sampley, quote, the translation of ex estine as lawful is misleading. The maxim's contention has nothing to do with the law, but with what is permissible, allowable, or authorized for the believer, unquote. And so here you have two significant English versions like the NIV, New International Version, 1 Corinthians 6:12. It more correctly has, everything is permissible for me, or the New English Bible has, I am free to do anything. Anthony Thistleton, a commentator of 1 Corinthians, argues for the rendering liberty to do anything. So first, in 1 Corinthians 6:12, you have to have a good translation of panta moi ex estine. So everything is permissible or everything is permittable for me tends to be the most frequent alternative one will witness. Okay, now you got a better translation of the statement in view in 1 Corinthians 6:12. Is that a statement of the Apostle Paul, or was it instead a statement of a particular Corinthian faction? So I'm going to inform you about this. Regardless of which position they take regarding the validity of the Torah in the post-resurrection era, 1 Corinthians commentators widely agree that everything is permissible, panta moi ex estine, was a slogan adhered to by many of the Corinthians, which Paul thought it quite necessary to address in his letter. Unlike the New American Standard, whether it's the 1995 update or even now the 2020 update, versions like the Revised Standard Version, New International Version, New Revised Standard, English Standard Version, and Holman Christian Standard Bible include what is stated in quotation marks to reflect the view that what Paul was repeating, what many of the Corinthians had either been saying to him, possibly in a letter to him, or what had been reported back to him as what they had been saying. Okay, so do you understand that? Various modern versions will separate out that statement, which is best translated along the lines of everything is permissible for me, as Paul responding to what a Corinthian faction had been saying, either in a written letter to Paul or what had been reported back to Paul in person by somebody. Okay? And of course, what does Paul say in that regard? All things are permitted for me. He responds, but not all things are profitable. All things are permitted for me, but I will not be mastered by anything, because people who think that they have the freedom or liberty to do anything will eventually find themselves being mastered by the very thing they think they're permitted to do. Okay, and here, this was not the only Corinthian slogan which interpreters have detected within the epistle of 1 Corinthians, which Paul had to address in his letter, which possibly involved. So you can go and look at this FAQ in greater detail in 1 Corinthians 6:12. But there are other possible slogans appearing in 1 Corinthians. Okay, so here you have everything is permissible for me, 1 Corinthians 6:12. That's the New International Version, also appearing in 10:13. A few other slogans, which commentators generally are in agreement about. It is good for a man not to touch a woman, 1 Corinthians 7:1. We know that we all have knowledge, 1 Corinthians 8:1. We know that there is no such thing as an idol in the world. 1 Corinthians 8:4. But food will not commend us to God. 1 Corinthians 8:8. There is no resurrection of the dead. 1 Corinthians 15:5. And all those are from New American Standard. So what this means is that, and you need to look at these passages in your Bible. You need to perhaps look at some of the annotations or study notes in a study Bible. I definitely discuss them in my commentary, 1 Corinthians for the Practical Messianic. These are statements which many commentators agree were not made by the Apostle Paul, but rather represented some faction in Corinth, which Paul was having to respond to. And indeed, this should not be something difficult to process. 1 Corinthians, among other letters of Paul, was a letter, and he was engaged in some kind of two-way dialogue, either written correspondence which had been sent to him by the Corinthians, or things which had been orally reported to him by those who had interacted with the Corinthians. And I think for a Messianic reader of Paul's letter, when they can understand that, and they don't have to be caught not knowing what to do with a statement like, everything is permissible for me, when they can recognize that's not Paul speaking, that's Paul quoting from the Corinthians, a Corinthian faction, it can make people be like, oh, thank God. I can understand what Paul's saying now. I can understand what he's doing now. And this is not, and how many of us in our lives, when we interact with people, we quote them, quote unquote, but that was done in ancient times as well. And indeed, this helps all of us to engage with some contemporary scholarship. It is not some conclusion, that is out of left field. It's actually engaging with what not only Christian examiners have proposed, but what appears in mainstream versions, Revised Standard Version, New Revised, English Standard Version, and even to an extent, the Tree of Life version, a Messianic version. So I hope this is something which you can find very helpful. And indeed, please, if you do not already, get a copy of 1 Corinthians for the Practical Messianic for either your home or congregational library. And there are, of course, a lot of other things addressed in this commentary, which Messianic people do struggle with. And again, I mean that with all the love and respect in the world. Okay, so that concludes our theology roundup. And now let's go on to the news roundup. And all of these news stories will be linked when this episode is archived at messianicapologetics.net. So you can go and look at the different news clips, or you can read the article, you can read the post. We do the news roundup after the theology roundup because of how news is always something which is time sensitive. News changes. Indeed, the biggest thing I think a lot of people are waiting for right now is the papal conclave, and how many rounds of voting are we going to have before knowing who the next pope is. And as I said, starting out about 20 minutes ago, we don't know who the next pope is, and there has not been a conclusion made at the Vatican. But of course, people are watching that very, very carefully. All right, so let's get into some of the news. These are things which I encounter passively on social media. So X, formerly Twitter, Instagram, also Facebook, and some of you even will direct message me with something we can go through. All right, our first story, and this is from yesterday, May the 6th, from the New York Post. President Trump announced Tuesday that Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen had agreed to stop attacking American vessels in the Red Sea, and that his administration will cease strikes on them in response. Indeed, a lot of us are of the opinion that the Houthis in Yemen are being bombed into the Stone Ages, and enough is probably enough. All right, our next story, and this is from yesterday, Tuesday, May the 6th, from CNN. Cardinals choosing the next pope have been offered a dossier on candidates with a subtext. And of course, you can look at this in greater detail, but mainly, the electors are allowed to take in written materials because when this has already started, all of the cardinals, they got to turn in their phones. They're going to be sequestered from the world. They're not going to have access to the media. In the days leading up to the conclave, have been offered a book on their fellow cardinals, one which contains a clear message. Titled The College of Cardinals Report, it offers profiles on around 40 papal candidates, including a breakdown on where they stand on topics such as same-sex blessings, ordaining female deacons, and the church's teaching on contraception. The subtext: choose a pope who will take the church in a different direction to Pope Francis, whose progressive reforms angered some conservatives. Look, I'm not the biggest fan of Roman Catholicism by a long shot, but we do have to follow what is taking place right now because we're going to be affected by it religiously in some way. We're also going to be affected by it politically and also just socially. All of us have Roman Catholic neighbors. And so because of that, we do need to know about the changes which are taking place. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see if a new pope is selected by the end of the week. Open source intel from May the 6th, and this is from the meeting President Trump had at the Oval Office with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney yesterday. This is from the press conference. Trump says he will have, quote, a very, very big announcement to make, unquote, before he departs for the Middle East. Quote, it'll be one of the most important announcements that has been made in many years about a certain subject, unquote. So President Trump is going to the Middle East by next week, and he's going to be visiting Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. I'm not sure if that's the correct order, but he's saying that there's going to be a huge announcement on something very important, which has taken many years to come together. And of course, that is generating a lot of speculation and a lot of guesses. Okay, so this is from Instagram. This is a religious story. Some of you all may follow Amy Main. She is a conservative, relative, evangelical. And here she is responding to, what is your advice for dating someone who isn't a Christian? How can I convert them? My answer, break up with them. And indeed, many of us who were raised in evangelicalism, the 1990s into the 2000s, we were definitely told, if you date someone, obviously of the opposite sex, make sure that they are a believer, that they are a man or woman of faith, that they have an active relationship with Jesus, that they read their Bible, that they pray every day, that you have a common value system, especially in the area of sexuality. I was definitely taught by different on-campus Christian groups at the University of Oklahoma. There is no missionary dating. Don't think you can marry a non-believer and then see that they come to faith as a result of your marriage. And, having been called into ministry and being called into ministry as a single man, that value just had to be shot up exponentially higher. How can you be in ministry and marry a non-believer? And then, of course, you come across the Messianic community, which has people who represent the same value system. There's no missionary dating. Don't marry a non-believer. But then you've got others who observe, and I mean this with a lot of respect here, they observe different Jewish value systems regarding courtship, matchmaking, etc. And it's just like, well, we have a single man over here, a single woman over here. They just need to get married and they'll figure it out later. They may not love each other right now, but they'll grow into love. And I have definitely seen in my Messianic experience different young men and young women, particularly because of the small size of our faith community. Well, I think he's a believer. I think she's a believer. You know, she's got some baggage. He's got some baggage, but we'll work it out over time. That does not represent the value system I have. And yes, I'm broadly in agreement with Amy May, and I appreciate a number of the things she does. Can she be more conservative than me? Sometimes, of course. But in this case, she does represent a value system regarding dating and relationships, which I can confirm I was raised with going back to the late 1990s, the 2000s. And yeah, if it keeps you single, but plugged into the kingdom. All right, moving on. This is from yesterday, May the 6th. My charisma. Is the Gog-Magog war about to begin? Bible scholar warns of prophetic trigger. So yeah, there's a conflict going on right now between Russia and Ukraine, the Middle East. This person at least thinks that John Barnett is his name. He thinks that God is headed toward this, the second coming of Christ and the launching of Israel as the center of the world and the beacon of hope. Barnett pointed to real-world developments aligning with the prophetic timeline found in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And of course, he comes from a pre-tribulation rapture perspective. He thinks that Ezekiel 38 and 39 is about to take place. Now, for myself, I am inclined, at the moment at least, to hold to the opinion that Ezekiel 38 and 39, whatever Gog and Magog are, is something which is going to take place early on in the 70th week of Daniel in some way. Some actually think it's more post-millennial than not. I'm inclined to believe it's premillennial. But at the same time, there are prophecies preceding in Ezekiel 37, the valley of the dry bones, and the reunion of the two sticks, which require our attention as well. And in the Messianic community, we get a lot of attention to the valley of the dry bones, Ezekiel 37, 1 through 14. And then because of two house abuses of the Ephraimite movement, the two stick oracle of Ezekiel 37, 15 through 28 is just skipped over. And regardless of some of the details, that is a prophecy which is yet to be fulfilled as well, detailing the resolution to the issue of the divided kingdom, the northern and southern kingdoms of ancient Israel. So the Gog-Magog conflict, we continue to monitor things. Of course, there's so many prophecies which take place, they are fulfilled, and people figure it out subsequent to their completion. But we do need to be aware of what people are saying. And as I've said it many times, whether we like it or not, charisma is the one resource, because they are very pro-Messianic Jewish, which is going to influence more Messianic people than perhaps any other. Okay, Breitbart. Yesterday, May the 6th, President Donald Trump announced on Tuesday that the United States will stop bombing the Houthis after the terrorist group conveyed they will stop attacks on American ships. All right. Now here, Trump said, quote, "We had some very good news last night. The Houthis have announced that they are not, or they've announced to us at least, that they don't want to fight anymore. They just don't want to fight, and we will honor that." Yeah, these people are being bombed into the Stone Age. The announcement comes after Israel carried out massive airstrikes in Yemen's capital of Sana'a on Monday, destroying the country's main airport. Israel's airstrikes were in response to a Houthi missile strike on Sunday that hit the Ben Gurion International Airport in Israel. So, have the Houthis just lost their will to fight? All right. Also, this is a follow-up. This is from End Time Headlines. In anticipation of his forthcoming visit to the Middle East, President Trump has announced that a significant announcement is imminent. All right, and there are a lot of speculations as to what this is going to involve. Now, some of the main speculation is the rumor, and again, we stress rumor, is that Saudi Arabia is going to sign the Abraham Accords. So, along with that, let's go through some of this. From open source intel, yesterday, May the 6th, Saudi Arabia is set to sign an agreement with the U.S. on mining and mineral resources. Okay, that doesn't, of course, require signing up to the Abraham Accords. Okay, here's another one. Just breaking the rumors here from the X or Twitter channel Am Yisrael Chai. Dear non-Jew, speaking up against Jew hatred. Thank you, the Jewish people. Now, I thought this was an appreciable meme because what does this Jewish channel say? It refers to people who are not Jewish as dear non-Jew. Notice what it did not say. It didn't say dear Gentile. Now, the term Gentile in different contexts can mean pagan. And people who are theologically mature, who are not Jewish, if they're called Gentile, they just need to roll with this. Yet, I've mentioned this many, many times, often to deaf ears on the part of Messianic Jews. If non-Jewish believers in the Messianic movement have to be sensitive with the terms they use, like Yeshua, not Jesus, Messiah, not Christ, execution stake and not cross, even something like turn rather than convert, because Jewish people can be offended, then if non-Jewish people are offended or get upset by the term Gentile, you can use a term like not Jewish, non-Jew, or the nations instead, as would be indicated here by this Jewish channel on X, Dear Non-Jew, speaking up against Jew hatred. Thank you, the Jewish people. Okay, so back to the rumor mill. Open source intel late last night on X, formerly Twitter. Steve Witkoff announces that there will soon be many announcements related to the Abraham Accords. So that is what it is believed Trump was referring to as the big announcement before going to the Middle East. Of course, this is just a rumor mill. This is how current events operate. Also, regarding this post from Open Source Intel, this is from the channel The FAI Wire. This might be a reference to Trump's earth-shaking announcement teased earlier. Saudi Arabia is expected to be on the list. Other possibilities are Oman, Qatar, Kuwait, Yemen, the recognized government in exile, and Syria. Now, look, this is just the rumor mill. Who knows, right? Who knows? But be paying attention to the Middle East. Be paying attention to some of the places where Trump is going. Without any question, the crown jewel of the Arab Islamic world is Saudi Arabia. For Saudi Arabia to have open relations with the state of Israel would be huge. And of course, it will get a lot of people speculating on prophecy. If Trump is able to pull it off, is he the beast? Is he the forerunner to the beast? We know to just simply pay attention. Okay, so this is from the New York Post. Today, May the 7th, President Trump is expected to announce that the U.S. will begin referring to the Persian Gulf as the Arabian Gulf or the Gulf of Arabia while visiting Saudi Arabia next week. Now, there actually is a Gulf of Arabia. It's on the outside of what is commonly called the Persian Gulf, I believe. Now, is Trump using this as a way to, push the Iranians, i.e. the Persians, into doing what he wants? This is just kind of an insult. Hey, if you don't do business with us, you don't negotiate with us. As far as the United States is concerned, the Persian Gulf is the Arabian Gulf because those in the Arabian world, the Arabic world, they want to play with us. They want to work with us, and you really don't. This is just like with the whole issue of Gulf of America, Gulf of Mexico. It's likely to get some people stirred up and ticked off at him. Okay, then finally, and this is from Newsmax from today, an Israeli official said on Wednesday that 24 hostages were alive in Gaza after President Donald Trump said the number was 21, alarming the families of hostages. Okay, so we need to be praying as believers and as a Messianic community. Yes, for the return of the hostages taken on October the 7th, but we also especially need to be praying that this conflict in Gaza concludes as quickly as is humanly possible. We really do need to show that. Number one, we'll have some leverage with those who think that, Israel is committing some kind of a genocide against the Palestinians and they're only interested in taking over territory. No, Israel needs to fight for their citizens, defend the homeland, get the hostages back. But yeah, we're praying for a quick, peaceful solution. And of course, what is the only solution to the problem in the Middle East? There's only one solution. It's Yeshua the Messiah. And it's knowing him, recognizing him as the Savior of humanity, the King of the Jews, and the one who's going to return to Jerusalem and set up his throne. And hastening that taking place is something today's Messianic community is here to do. So we have a lot of things to be paying attention for. We're going to see what happens in the Middle East with Trump's upcoming visit. We do have the building tension between India and Pakistan, of course, Russia, Ukraine, and are we going to have a new pope by the end of the week? A lot of things to be paying attention to. And yeah, the Messianic community, the end-time move of God, we should have the edge regarding this. And we should definitely be in awe that we are living at this time in human history. As always, on behalf of Outreach Israel Ministries and Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and donations toward all of our ministry efforts. You can give online at outreachisrael.net/support. We'll see you again tomorrow with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you, shalom, and take care.